Welcome to my book review. Today we'll be covering the book What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat by Aubrey Gordon. To preface this video, I do not have any particular issues with the people involved. I simply have my own thoughts on the book. They may or may not align with the views held within the book, but in the end, what I think is most important is whether or not the book is a worthwhile read. In summary, the best way to describe this book would be as an introduction to the body positivity movement, paired off with personal insights based on stories from the author's own life. Mix in some calls to action, to either stand up for your fat friends or, if you so happen to be fat, to stand up for yourself. The overall feeling of this book is that we have an obligation to keep our fat friends in mind whenever we speak, and that the world is out to oppress those people of size who in popular culture are oftentimes depicted as boogeymen. Instead of accepting the obesity epidemic for what it is, Aubrey embraces the idea that diets don't work, that she eats healthy and still can't lose weight, and that it's the world at large paired with anti-fat stigma that is the issue, with one of the more important quotes being, "You can't change the world, you can only change yourself," which I have no idea why this came up, as it is an antithesis to this book as a whole. This book is not a fat memoir, nor is it a weight loss book, though in my opinion, one should be forgiven for thinking the former, as it certainly has diary qualities at points. She mentions quite often her own feelings and experiences with fat shaming, bullying, fear of visiting doctors, troubles with media and their depictions of fat, and so on. Before I continue with the actual review, I would like to throw this out there as a thought. First of all, there are about 100,000 other things, not to mention more productive things, that could have been done instead of writing this book. Many of which would have actually helped you better yourself, Miss Aubrey, but then that might have put this book's publishing on hold, and then we wouldn't have this to read today. So thanks, I guess. I have to thank Miss Aubrey for being open about herself personally, as it made it easier since I did not have to hunt down this information myself. Aubrey Gordon is 5 foot 10 inches tall, or 177 centimeters, and at the time of writing this book, 342 pounds, or 155 kilograms. She proclaims that she has always been fat and prefers fat as an objective word because it is not insulting, it is a descriptor and is neutral. She doesn't mind fluffy or zaftig either. The only word that bothers her is obese, as it has been deemed a slur. She is a queer white woman. I point this out only because this makes no real difference in my opinion, though she openly stated it. And in her intro, she throws out some clothing sizes which also really don't matter because every brand has its own interpretations of the number sizes and its own charts, so I won't list them here. Why do I mention this? Not to fat shame, but to just lay it all out there plainly as the author did, and so I thought I would be remiss to not mention it here. At one point during the introduction, she references fluffykittenparty.com and the fatagories, or the categories of fat, which she only openly mentions small fats and very fats. But the charts don't mention those. They go higher as in infinite fat and death fat, so we'll assume very fat covers everything higher than small fat. So to put this out there right now, people who don't wear plus size need to hear and listen. So why is obesity a slur, you may ask? Obesity, or obesis, which translates to having eaten oneself fat, or is just a Latin word for fat, so it shouldn't be a slur. We give words power, and that's not to say that they can't hurt, but if fat is acceptable, then let the word obese run off your back. In any case, the book goes on to bring up flying and the experience with dealing with someone who doesn't want to sit next to you, and immediately between the introduction, talking about weight stigma, shaming, and now difficulties with flying, I have to point out that the title, What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat, is a lie. These are many speaking points which have been brought up many times before and will likely be spoken of for a long time to come. And that's one of my bigger issues with this book as a whole. It's repetitive if you have had any experience with the fat acceptance lifestyle's way of speaking, as it spends time reminding you of vocabulary such as obese, plus size, extended plus size, diet culture, eating disorders, disordered eating, fat phobia, and sizeism. But on the other spectrum, it acts as though it is an introduction. It both speaks to a person of the fat acceptance culture like a book written for them by them, while trying to reach out and dabble with ideas like, yes, we see you underweight person, it states meekly a couple of times before remembering that eating disorders are fat-phobic, and quietly returning to fat issues, and how our culture is not meant for people over a certain weight. So yes, flying while fat has never been brought up before, and absolutely every thin person has a wonderful time on the plane. I'll let you know once I've been on one. But until then, the book itself also mentions a lot of popular culture. Like a lot. We can only experience our own weight and our own body. She claims in this book that you cannot speak for a fat person or understand what a person's thought process on a topic is. Then she turns around and tries to speak for a thin person from their perspective, when she states that she has always been fat, which to me is very backwards. They want to perpetuate the idea that thin is a sign of a work ethic or status, while also not understanding that people of low status and low to no income can also lose weight and maintain their weight loss. But then that would go against the whole idea that nothing can be done about weight, and that some people just go against the flow and thermodynamics, and I'm sure that this has been heard by every fat person and thin person alike, at least the ones that are interested in the topic. She uses the phrase, "at least I'm not that fat," as a mantra of sorts, as though she understands what is going on in the mind of a thin person who looks at her or anyone in popular media who happens to be heavy. I cannot speak for everyone but for myself. "At least I'm not that fat" is not strong enough. When I look at a person heavier than myself, I'm not comparing. And when I'm thinking about how my body doesn't feel right to me in that moment, I'm comparing me to me. She also goes on to mention a plethora of words I believe she's made up. Fat calling to replace cat calling, and thin-splaining, as well as thin securities and thin interrogations. That is to say that this book is mostly comprised of things that people are accustomed to hearing by this point. Though I haven't read too much in this genre, so maybe there's a niche for this in novel format. In any case, there's medical talk and how people are scared to go to the doctors, yet more talking points which have been brought up time and time again. I read the whole thing wondering where the title would become true, but that just did not come. What I did get was more questions as to why it's easier to come up with excuses or write a whole book instead of just cutting back on what you're eating. Why mention following macros if you clearly don't know what they mean or what they do for you unless you just want to make it sound as though you tried? The whole thing comes across as though you know what you're supposed to do, like you read it in textbooks, but you have no idea how it works because you have never had it work, or you haven't tried hard enough or stuck to it long enough, and like you just wanted things to fall into place without any sort of effort. One review got it right and had a good job of explaining it with 1 star, which reads, "Rambling, whining, and flowery prose. This book is an incohesive collection of blog posts, each without a clear point other than to complain about the difficulties of being obese. The author disowns any responsibility for her own obesity. She believes obesity is purely genetic and complains at length about all of the problems that she and other fat people endure. She fails to accept any responsibility for her failure to maintain a healthy body weight and instead advocates for the rest of the world to change so she doesn't have to suffer the natural consequences of her poor lifestyle choices. The belief that you can't do something is true if that is what you follow. At every avenue, the author comes up with excuses and reasons why she will stay the same weight while wanting the rest of the world to change around her. For her sake, I hope she can wake up to this, but I bring this book up because it's filled with more flaws in logic than it makes any good points. With her BMI at 50, she wonders why it might be brought up in an appointment, but then turns around and says that it's not a memoir. Ultimately, the choice to read this is up to you. In conclusion, I do not recommend this book. Shorter spurts of information that contains all of the buzzwords around fat and the fat community are out there. This is just a collection of them, all in book form. The final chapter, which reads as a manifesto to follow this body justice, not the watered-down body positivity, because anyone following along with this narrative will know that what they want is a fat space, and she in fact mentions this in this book. She knows that if you were to lose weight, things might be easier, but they would rather stay fat. No one is naturally 400 plus pounds. And I didn't mention this, but at the intro of the book, she says that her highest has been 400. I can't lie, this was actually quite a difficult book for me to get through. I don't really offer much in the way of examples or the likes because I was hoping to give more or less my thoughts on the book itself, so this isn't so much of a debunking or a thorough covering of the book because, like I've mentioned, it's mostly just a fat acceptance guide. I hope that if you got to this point in the video that it means you enjoyed what you heard. Know of any other books that could be brought up? Please feel free to let me know. Otherwise, that's all for today. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, goodbye!